Welcome for those who are just hopping in. We're here to talk about section 11 as it pertains to preschool today. If you could sign in, you can use your phone and scan that barcode or the QR code, or you can use the link that Jenheim has put in the chat box, and we'll get started in a couple minutes. I'm Stacy Vince. I'm the Early Learning and Literacy Consultant at the State Support Team. I have Jenheim here with me today, as well as Danielle Holztrager. We're going to focus in on section 11 of the IEP, but as it pertains to preschool, because we know preschool is a little bit different than school age. So our norms for today and for every time when we meet, respecting different views, some clear goals, ask any question. We know preschool is its own beast. So please ask any questions you may have, be engaged, respect everyone, and we will get started. So when we think about LRE, we know that LRE, we want our students with disabilities in the general education to the maximum extent possible. So we all know the definition of LRE. So we're going to look at that form and kind of what that form looks like. So we know we have our questions that pop up. So depending on if you're using like IEP Anywhere or Same Goal, once you click it's a preschool child, you get the whole section in there and they come and they go away. Or if you use the adapted forms that are on OD's website, the same thing happens. So when we get to does a child attend a general education setting? It's very different in preschool than it is in school age. So to determine what type of classroom it is, a licensing specialist is going to ask you, are there any children in the classroom on an individualized education program, on an IEP? If the answer is yes, then who's providing the services? So who's providing the services to that child is going to dictate if you're in a gen ed classroom or if you're in a preschool special ed classroom. So if the head teacher is providing those services for the IEP, then it is a preschool special education classroom. So we would check no. If that child is being provided services by itinerant, an itinerant can be an intervention specialist, OT, PT, speech, VI, HI, all of those, then they're in a gen ed setting, a gen ed classroom. So then we would click yes, that they attend that general education setting. So just to reiterate, we're truly looking at who is implementing that IEP. If the head teacher is not responsible, then we know that's a general education preschool classroom. If the head teacher is responsible, then it's a preschool special education classroom. Any questions on those? All right.
I'm not seeing anything in the chat. There is one question in the chat to add the slides in. So I'll go ahead and paste the link for the slides in the chat.
Thanks, Jen. So the first question asks, does a child attend a gen ed setting? In order to answer this question, it's very important to understand what is meant by the gen ed setting. We're thinking about where that child is receiving services and who those services are being provided by. So when we think about this, where they could be at, that child could be in a gen ed ODE program, they can be in a non-public preschool program, they can be in a Head Start program, and those all would be considered that gen ed preschool program. And if we see on there, if they're in that gen ed program and they're receiving all of their services within that setting, so if an itinerant teacher is coming in, then we would check yes, because they're getting their services provided within that regular classroom. Our next scenario, if we look at it, what happened to my screen? Here we go. Does a child attend a gen ed setting? Yes, but does a child receive all or his special education services within that setting? No. So some reasons why they wouldn't get their services within that setting is some programs do service provider location, where kids come to them for small groups. Some services are provided in more of a pull out than push in. So if we're doing all pull out and not pushing in, then no, we'd have no, and we're removing that child from that gen ed setting. And then we have to have a justification for why the child can't be receiving their services inside that general education setting. And again, just to reiterate, when children are removed from that gen ed classroom, districts must explain why the instruction cannot be delivered in the gen ed setting with non-disabled peers with access to accommodations and modifications. And, they want to make note to stress that the presence of a disability alone is not a reason for removal. So we can't say that all of our students that have speech-related issues, we're going to pull them into the hallway just because we know that we're going to need to work on them or they need to hear us. That every child that is a speech issue, we're going to pull out. We can't do that. So if we have that does a child attend a gen ed setting, which again, it goes back to who is providing those services. So if that teacher is directly providing those services, then we know, no, they're not in a gen ed setting. Next two questions pop up. And what prevents the child from being able to attend a gen ed setting? Who provides the child with instruction in the general education curriculum? So we have to give a reasoning about what prevents them from being able to attend that gen ed setting. So here is just an example of one. So we would justify what prevents them from being in there, and then who is providing that support to that child. That could be the early childhood intervention specialist. It could be someone in consult with the preschool gen ed teacher. It could be the related services in conjunction with the preschool teacher. So we would notate in there who is providing those services. And it states that you want to make sure you're covering the role of the person who's providing the instruction in the gen ed curriculum and also how that person is providing access to that gen ed curriculum. Any questions on that?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So based on what you explained, like the first question, does a child attend a general education setting? So is it possible that a child, like two children could be attending the same setting, but one child is receiving intervention specialist services from the head teacher, so they're not in a gen ed setting, but another child is getting only speech services from an SLP? So then you would check yes, that they are attending a general education setting, even though they're both in the same classroom?
No, because that teacher is providing special education services. They can't play a dual role. So both of those students would still be not in a gen ed setting because the teacher of record is an intervention specialist, and they might not be providing direct services, but they could be providing indirect.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. So this is pulled from the monitoring guide about what we need in that justification. So when we justify why that child could not be in the educated with their non-disabled peers, we need to have it based on the needs of the child, not the disability. It should reflect that the team has given adequate consideration to meeting the student's needs in the regular classroom with supplementary services. Documentation that the nature or severity of the disability is such that education and regular education classes, even with the use of supplementary aids and services, cannot be achieved satisfactory, and then describe the potential harmful effects to the child or others. So if monitoring were to come through, they would look at that section and see if your justification aligns to that. So if a rationale is not given or the rationales given, it's not based on student needs. So if it doesn't meet the compliance monitoring, it's not based on student needs. It doesn't reflect consideration or provisions of supplementary aids and does not describe potential harmful effects. So then that would be, you'd be out of compliance. So the crazy part when we get to preschools and when we think about, is that a gen ed setting? So we have, for an educational decision, we use those licensing rules, like who is providing those services. But for EMIS coding is based on that ratio of that classroom. So if your classrooms are at least 50-50, 50% typical students, 50% students with disabilities, then that is considered a gen ed setting. So what we report for EMIS does not necessarily align to what you dictate on that IEP is if it's a gen ed setting. So I'm going to take you to this, and I think Jen's going to put the link in the chat box to you as well. So there's this, I better share it too. Here we go. So there's an online decision tool that you can use, and you can click through and answer the questions. But we're going to take a look at this chart here. So on our chart, does a child attend a regular early childhood program? And down here, we can see that a regular early childhood program is a program with includes a majority, at least 50% of non-disabled peers. So then we kind of go through, if they do attend that program, how many hours are they in that program? We know all of our students that are in a PSC, a preschool special education classroom, get at the minimum 10 hours a week. And then where are they receiving those services? So if they're in that gen ed setting, are they receiving services within that classroom? Then we see that they're that IE 51, somewhere else, IE 55. We do have some cases where, let's say a student goes to Mother Goose Land, they're at Mother Goose Land, let's say less than 10 hours. And then where are they receiving those services? And then we do them service provider location, then they would be the IE 56 because they are somewhere getting that gen ed. And then we have for a special education setting where we know that there are more students with disabilities than typical peers. If they're in a separate class, a separate school, residential. And then finally, if they're not in a special education program, if they're at home going nowhere else, we would notate them as an IE 70, or if they're coming in just for service provider location in IE 72. So just to reiterate, like what we mark on that IEP for that gen ed setting does not necessarily always align with what we report for EMIS. Any questions on that? Because I know that can be very confusing. Okay, so let me take you back. All right. So that was all that we had for this section. Are there any questions in general about that section as it regards preschool? Perfect. We would really appreciate your feedback so we know what you need or where we need to go from there. So Jen's going to put the link in the chat box for you as well, or you can scan it on your phone. I'll give you a second in case you want to scan it.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat either, Stacy. I've been keeping an eye.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Again, you can go to the SSTR2 website and you can find all of our PDs that we have in the PD catalog. All of our IEP Happy Hours have been posted on the PD on demand, so you can go back and watch them when you'd like or if you've missed one. Again, you have all of our contact information. You can contact Julie, Jen, Danielle, or myself if you have any questions. Our next happy hour is next week, March 15th from 3 to 4. It'll be section 12 as it pertains to preschool through 7th grade. You can register online at our website. Any last questions or anything you have before we wrap up? Awesome. Well, you all have an awesome day and we will see you next week. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Stacy.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was